In this tutorial, you will learn how to configure your e-transport application in Socrate Business Services, or SBS for short. This tutorial deals specifically with the configuration of e-transport. If you're looking for information about using e-transport, check our e-transport how to use tutorial. Also, if you are completely new to SBS, it's recommended that you watch our Getting Started tutorial first. To use e-transport, your application will exchange real-time data with the Romanian National Agency for Fiscal Administration, ANAF. For that purpose, it will require OAuth 2.0 authorization with ANAF. Let's see how this process works. The user clicks a button in your application, for example, Authorize. Your application calls the Generate Authorization Request method of the SBS API. The SBS API returns a URL to which the user should be redirected and a state parameter that you will need in a subsequent step. The user clicks the received URL and goes to an ANAF page where they can enter their ANAF credentials and authenticate with ANAF. If the authentication is successful, ANAF returns an authorization code to a URL called the callback URL. As you will see next, this callback URL is configurable. Your application calls the Finalize Authorization Request method of the SBS API, providing as input the authorization code and the state parameter obtained earlier. SBS returns the authorization. Now let's establish the actual e-transport needs for your application. From that perspective, there are several things to consider. Who should be the OAuth 2.0 client in the authorization process with ANAF? Is it your application or is it Socrate Business Services? If you choose the former, you will need to create a developer account on ANAF website and set up your custom ANAF OAuth 2.0 secrets. If you choose to authorize SBS, your users need to be able to access the socrate.io domain in the authorization process. If your application has a web interface, you will most likely want to authorize your application as ANAF OAuth 2.0 client and set up a custom callback URL that points to your specific application domain. Note that desktop applications cannot have a custom callback URL from design, because they do not run on a server. Do you need multiple OAuth 2.0 callback URLs for your application? You might need several OAuth 2.0 callback URLs if your application is hosted on multiple internet domains, or if you are in the process of migrating from one domain to another. Depending on how you answered the questions mentioned before, the following scenarios are possible. Scenario 1 involves the least amount of configuration but is not so flexible. For desktop applications, this is the only possible scenario. Scenarios 2 and 3 can be implemented only for web applications. They provide most flexibility but require more configuration steps. You can find the e-transport settings for your application in the SBS console. Sign into the SBS console at console.socrate.io and find your application. Under the RO ANAF tab, click e-transport. The first configuration setting is the ANAF environment. ANAF provides two e-transport environments, a test one and a production one. The production environment should be used only after you have tested your app against the ANAF test environment. If your application is for testing and should use only the ANAF test environment, enable the Use Test Environment option. Strong caution is advised when changing this option. Typically, you should switch an app to a test environment only if it is brand new and has no active tenants. If your app is in production and is already used by any tenants, it is strongly recommended not to switch it to the test environment, because all tenants will be affected with immediate effect. The next available configuration option is Use Implicit Credentials. Enable this option only if you want to use Scenario 1 for OAuth 2.0 authorization. Let's recall this scenario. This setup is suitable for desktop applications or for web applications where you don't need a custom callback URL. Choose this scenario if you prefer to use SBS provided defaults and configure as little as possible. Notice that the callback URL is a default one as provided by SBS and it cannot be changed. This means that the process is simplified compared to the one you've seen before, namely, your application does not finalize the authorization itself since it does not control the callback URL and thus does not have the authorization code sent by ANAF. Instead, SBS finalizes the authorization. Your application informs the user of the authorization outcome by redirecting them either to its success URL or to an error URL, depending on the outcome. You can define the on success or on error URLs by providing them as parameters to the generate authorization request method. If your application needs a custom callback URL, then scenario 2 is more suitable. In this setup, you use your own ANAF OAuth 2.0 secrets instead of the implicit ones provided by SBS. This gives you a more precise control over the OAuth 2.0 authorization process with ANAF, because you can set up your own custom callback URL. To obtain the custom OAuth 2.0 credentials for your application, you will need to register for a new developer account at ANAF. Visit anaf.ro. Navigate to Servicii online. Înregistrare utilizatori. Dezvoltatori aplicații. Înregistrare pentru API-uri. And fill in the required fields. After filling in all the fields and clicking the button, you will receive an email with an activation URL. Click the activation URL to complete the registration process. Once you have created and signed into your ANAF developer account, click Editare Profil, OAuth and fill in the following fields. Denumire aplicație. The name of your app. This field must not contain spaces. Callback URL 1. This is the URL at which ANAF will return the outcome of the authorization process after your app's user has gone through it. Set this to your custom URL of your choice, for example, myapp.example.org. Serviciu. Select e-transport, e-factura, or both, depending on what services your app needs to integrate with. Click Generare Client ID and be patient while the page loads. On success, a client ID and client secret will be generated for your app and displayed on the page. You can now enter this information into SBS. Make sure that the Use Implicit Credentials option is disabled. Click Edit and enter your client ID, client secret and custom callback URL as obtained from ANAF. Click Save. Your application is now ready to handle the OAuth 2.0 authorization with ANAF with a custom callback URL. Notice that the callback URL returned by ANAF is now under your application's control. Namely, your application can read the authorization code sent by ANAF from the callback URL and finalize the authorization. Let's now look at one more configuration scenario. Let's imagine that your application has many instances hosted on several internet domains. In this case, you might want to have a custom callback URL for each hosted instance of your application. You can set up multiple ANAF callback URLs as follows. Sign into your ANAF developer account as shown previously. Create a new application and enter your custom callback URL. For each custom callback URL that you need, create a new ANAF application. For each ANAF application, add the respective client ID, client secret and callback URL to the additional OAuth 2.0 clients table. Notice that in this setup there is a main OAuth 2.0 client secret and several additional clients. Your application is now ready to handle the OAuth 2.0 authorization with ANAF with multiple custom callback URLs. This works as follows. When SBS API clients call the Generate Authorization Request API method, they can optionally supply an OAuth callback parameter as input. This parameter should match the callback URL of any of the additional clients from the table you've seen earlier. If the parameter matches any of the callback URLs from the table, then the respective callback URL and its associated client secrets will be used for the ANAF authorization. When the authorization expires, the respective set of secrets will also be used to obtain the refresh token from ANAF. SBS will also check if the OAuth callback parameter is present in the main client secret. If it is, then the main client secret and callback URL will be used for the ANAF authorization. If you don't supply the OAuth callback parameter at all, then the main client secret and callback URL will be used for the ANAF authorization. To actually perform an OAuth 2.0 authorization with ANAF, your application calls the SBS API. For that purpose, SBS has a dedicated service called ROANAF OAuth service. You can call the Generate Authorization Request and Finalize Authorization Request API methods as applicable to the scenario that your application is implementing. This concludes the SBS eTransport configuration tutorial. For more information, check the links under the video. Thank you for watching.